The day Ethan Cole heard laughter, he had already decided to stop feeling things. He had made that decision quietly, somewhere between the last battle and the first long mile of riding west, and he had kept it faithfully for 6 years. It was not a dramatic resolution. It was simply a man closing a door inside himself and walking away from it. Easier that way, safer. A man who felt nothing could not lose anything more, and Ethan Cole had already lost more than he believed any one person was fairly owed. He was riding the south fence line of the Carrizo Creek property on a Thursday afternoon in July of 1873 when the sound reached him. The New Mexico sun was punishing and white, the kind that flattened everything beneath it. Color, shadow, ambition. His horse, a gray quarter horse named Flint, plodded forward without needing direction. They had ridden enough miles together that the horse had learned to follow the fence without being told. Ethan rode with his hat low and his eyes half closed, present in body only, his mind in that gray, borderless place it had learned to occupy. And then he heard it. Laughter. Not polite laughter, not the kind you offered in church or at a neighbor's table. This was the helpless, undignified, completely surrendered kind. The kind that comes when a situation has gone so wrong that the only honest response left is to find it funny. It rose from somewhere below the ridge, past the cottonwood line, where the creek bent south toward the lower pasture. It rose and fell and rose again, and it moved through Ethan Cole like a key turning in a lock he had forgotten existed. He sat up straight in the saddle. He had not heard anything like that in a long time. He tied Flint to a mesquite branch and went on foot, moving quietly without deciding to do it, the old instinct still in him after all these years. The cottonwoods closed around him, cool and rustling, and then he came around the last wide trunk and stopped completely. There was a woman in the creek mud. Not near the mud, not beside the mud, in it, waist deep, held fast by the thick gray clay that formed along the shaded inner bend of the creek where the water had deposited silt for 100 years. Her blue dress was ruined. Her dark hair had escaped every pin it had been given and hung loose and wild around her face. She was holding a small woven basket above her head with both arms, protecting whatever was inside from the mud that had claimed everything below her rib cage, and she was laughing. Ethan stood at the bank and simply looked at her for a moment. He could not help it. She noticed him and did not appear even slightly embarrassed. She looked at him with dark, steady eyes and the expression of a woman who had assessed the situation completely and chosen her response deliberately. "I don't suppose," she said, "that you have any experience with mud." "Some," he said. "Wonderful." She raised the basket slightly. "I was gathering yarrow for my aunt. Medicinal. The bank looked trustworthy." She paused. It was not. He almost smiled. He could feel the unfamiliar pull of it at the corner of his mouth. He crouched at the bank and looked at the mud and looked at her and said, "Can you move your feet?" She tried. The mud made a slow, reluctant sound and released nothing. "That would be no," she confirmed pleasantly. He pulled the rope from his belt, a habit so old it was now simply part of him, and waded to the edge of the firm ground. "Wrap this around your waist. Hold the basket up." She caught the rope one-handed, wrapped it twice without being told twice, and braced herself. He cooked the other end and pulled, not with force, but with the steady, patient pressure that moves things that cannot be rushed. She pushed from below. The mud held. He pulled again. She did not panic, did not plead, did not make the situation harder than it already was. She simply worked with him, quietly and steadily, and after a long, straining moment, the mud gave its deep surrender and released her, and she came forward all at once and stumbled, and he stepped in and caught her, one hand on her arm, one at her back, and they stood together in the shallow current at the creek's edge, both breathing hard. She was close. He was aware of that with a clarity that surprised him. She looked up at him, composed, warm, unhurried, and said quietly, "It's ridiculous, isn't it? A grown woman stuck like that."
and then softer, as though saying it to herself as much as to him. What else can I do but laugh? Ethan looked at her. Something moved in his chest, old and slow, like something waking. I don't remember, he said honestly. She tilted her head. Remember what? How to laugh like that? She looked at him for a long moment with those steady, dark eyes, and something in her expression shifted, not to pity, which he could not have borne, but to something more careful and more genuine. Recognition, maybe. The look of someone who understood without needing it explained. Her name was Clara Whitfield.
She was 24 years old, and she had come to New Mexico territory 2 years ago with nothing but 2 carpet bags and a grief so large she had not yet found the edges of it. Typhoid had taken her mother, her father, and her younger sister in a single Missouri winter. Her Aunt Margaret, her mother's sister, had taken her in without hesitation and given her work and purpose and the slow, patient gift of a life worth rebuilding. Clara spoke of all this as they walked to dry ground, as naturally as she spoke of the yarrow in her basket. No performance of pain, no request for sympathy, just the plain truth of what had happened and who she had become on the other side of it. Ethan listened and felt the door inside him, the one he had closed and walked away from 6 years ago, begin to ease open. Slowly, without drama, the way a door opens when the pressure on the other side finally equals the weight of what is holding it shut. "My aunt is the reason I came out here today," Clara said, looking at the basket. "She gives everything to everyone. She never asks for anything. I wanted to make her a proper tincture for her joints." She paused. "She's been working too hard for too many years, and she won't slow down unless someone makes her." "Sounds like someone else I just met," Ethan said. Clara looked at him sideways and smiled. It was the first time she had smiled at him directly, and it was, he thought, one of the more dangerous things he had ever encountered. He offered to ride with her to her aunt's property. She accepted without pretense, the way she accepted everything, simply, directly, as though complication were a choice she had decided not to make. They rode side by side through the long afternoon light, and he told her things he had not told anyone. About the war, not the battles. He had no interest in the battles, but the interior damage of it, the way it had reached inside him and rearranged things that could not be put back exactly as they were. The way he had come home and found the man he used to be was no longer available. The way he had ridden west, not because there was something out here to find, but because staying in place had become unbearable. "You're lonely," Clara said. He had expected the words to sting. Instead, they simply settled, the way a truth settles when someone finally speaks it out loud in the open air. "Yes," he said. "So was I," she said, "for a long time." She looked at the trail ahead. "But I think loneliness is something you can choose to put down, like a heavy stone. You've been carrying it so long you've forgotten you're holding it." Ethan said nothing, but he heard her. They were half a mile from her aunt's gate when Clara's horse stopped suddenly and threw her head, ears forward, eyes fixed on the brush to the left of the trail. Ethan's hand went to his rifle out of old instinct. They both went still. A figure stepped out of the brush. It was a boy, perhaps 14, thin, his face tight with something between fear and desperate resolve. He was holding his hat in both hands, and his eyes were red-rimmed, and his boots were wrong for the terrain, too thin-soled, the boots of someone who had walked much further than they were made to carry a person. "Ma'am," he said, looking at Clara, "I'm sorry to step out like that. I didn't mean to frighten you." He swallowed. "I'm looking for the Whitfield place. I was told Margaret Whitfield lives out this way." Clara straightened in her saddle. "She does. I'm her niece. What's this about?" The boy looked at his hat. "My name is James Aldrich. My mother, she's sick, fever. We've been traveling from Colorado for 3 weeks, and she got sick 2 days ago, and I don't—" He stopped, pressed his lips together hard. "Someone in the settlement said Mrs. Whitfield knew about medicine, about plants and such. I didn't know where else to go." Silence. The desert held its breath. Clara looked at the boy for one long moment and then looked at Ethan, and something passed between them, wordless, immediate, the kind of understanding that does not require history or explanation, only two people who have each known what it is to be desperate and alone and running out of road. "Where is your mother?" Clara asked. "Back on the trail, about a mile. We have a wagon." Clara turned her horse without another word. "Come on then." Ethan rode beside her, and they found the wagon, a battered, exhausted thing with one wheel badly repaired, and inside it a woman in her mid-30s burning with fever, barely conscious, her breathing shallow and rapid. Clara was down from her horse before Ethan had fully stopped, climbing into the wagon bed with the certainty of someone who had learned that hesitation costs more than action. She opened her basket, the yarrow she had nearly drowned for that afternoon, the willow bark. She worked quietly and efficiently, and with a steadiness that Ethan watched with something he recognized after a moment as awe. They brought the wagon to Margaret's homestead as the sun went down. Margaret herself, a compact, sharp-eyed woman of 60 who moved like someone 20 years younger, took one look at the situation and began heating water before anyone asked. The boy, James, sat at the kitchen table with his hat in his lap and his eyes fixed on the door to the back room where his mother lay, and Ethan sat across from him and said nothing, because sometimes what a person needs is not words, but simply another human being willing to stay in the room. Around midnight, the fever broke. The woman, her name was Ruth, opened her eyes and asked for water, and her son made a sound that was not quite a word and reached for her hand, and Margaret quietly closed the door to give them their moment. In the kitchen, Clara leaned against the counter with her arms folded and her eyes closed, exhaling slowly. Ethan was across the room. He watched her, the tiredness in her face, and beneath the tiredness, the quiet satisfaction of someone who had done what needing doing and knew it. "You didn't hesitate," he said. She opened her eyes. "Neither did you." He crossed the kitchen, stood before her. The lamplight was low and warm, and the desert outside was completely still. He said, "I've been running from things for 6 years, from memory, from connection, from anything that asked something of me." He paused. "I don't want to run from this." Clara looked up at him with those steady, dark eyes. "Then don't," she said simply. "I'm not an easy man," he said. "I have silences that go too long, and a past I'm still working through, and I don't always know how to say what I mean." "Ethan," her voice was gentle but firm, "I didn't fall in the mud by accident. I was trying to reach something worth having." She held his gaze. "I know what that looks like." He was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "I fell in love with you before I pulled you free. I want you to know that." Clara placed her hand against his chest, steady, unhurried, certain. "I know," she said softly. "I could tell." Outside, the desert night spread itself across the land in every direction, vast and ancient and indifferent to the small human things that happened beneath its stars. But in that kitchen, in the warm circle of lamplight, something had been decided, not with ceremony, not with grand words. With honesty, with presence, with two people choosing, quietly and deliberately, to stop running and stay. They were married the following April beneath the cottonwood trees along the creek, the same creek that had started everything. Margaret stood beside Clara and cried without apology. Young James Aldridge, who had spent the winter helping Ethan with the cattle work in exchange for a place to stay while his mother recovered, stood on Ethan's side and tried very hard not to cry and failed entirely. Clara wore wildflowers in her hair. Ethan wore a smile that nobody in that territory had ever seen on his face before, and everyone who saw it understood immediately that it was real. And the creek ran beside them, clear and unhurried, carrying everything gently forward into whatever came next. Some doors, once closed, stay closed forever, and some, if something real enough knocks, open again. Not easily, not all at once, but they open. Ethan Cole had closed himself down so thoroughly that he had stopped believing anything lived behind that door anymore. But then he heard laughter in the wilderness, unguarded, alive, completely unafraid, and he followed it. That single choice, that one small act of moving towards something instead of away, that was where everything began. Not in a grand moment, not in a battlefield, in mud, in a creek, on an ordinary Thursday afternoon in the desert. Sometimes that is exactly where life is waiting for you. If this story reached something inside you, you are not alone. Here on Desert Heart, we believe in the kind of love that finds you when you have stopped looking, the kind that asks nothing but your honesty and gives everything in return. If you felt something today, subscribe to Desert Heart and stay with us. Every story we tell is for people who still believe the world is capable of beauty. We will see you next time. This story holds meaningful value on multiple levels. It portrays the genuine psychological reality of Civil War veterans, men who returned home fundamentally changed, carrying what we now recognize as the invisible wounds of trauma long before medicine had language for it. It models healthy emotional recovery, not dramatic, not instant, but gradual and honest. It shows that community and human connection are the true medicine for isolation. The character of young James mirrors Ethan's own journey, showing that courage in vulnerability is not weakness, but strength. For older American viewers, this story affirms the profound truth that healing is possible at any stage of life, and that love, when it is real, does not ask you to be finished healing before it arrives.